right. Good afternoon, everybody, those here in the room and those on Zoom. I'm Sharon Medville, Director of the Water Resources Research Center, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you all today to the special book talk and book signing event, Living River, The Promise of the Mighty Colorado. I'll be introducing the author-photographer in just a moment, but for those who are on Zoom, I want to ask to please keep yourselves muted. Your questions can be put in the chat. When we do get to the Q&A portion, we'll take some questions from the room and then also from the Zoom. And Jesse will help me with those. We do have copies of the book. I don't think you could miss that walking in the building, those of you here. And Dave will be available afterwards to sign the books if he hasn't already. And for those of you online, where can they find the book?
LivingRiverColorado.org and Amazon and independent bookstores and DaveShowalter.com.
Okay, so lots of opportunity for those who want to buy this beautiful, beautiful book. So I want to first do some announcements and some of our upcoming events. I want to start off acknowledging respectfully that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous people. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. I also want to say happy Halloween, everybody. We do have some candies if anybody wants to partake, and some cookies. Sorry, we can't offer the Zoom people the candies, but the thought is there. Just want to mention some of our upcoming events. And interestingly enough, Dave lives in Colorado. We're co-sponsoring a technical meeting talk for the Colorado EWRI, which don't ask me what that stands for because I can't remember exactly. You might know, but it's a group, and it's for those of you like Mike. I'm looking at Mike Block here. The title of the talk is Advancement of the Flow Duration Curve, and Rick Kaler, I think is how he pronounces his name, is somebody I've met through organizations. He giving a talk there. And we're trying to get the word out because those who are trained hydrologists and others, I think, would find this really interesting. On November 12th, we're having a water webinar to celebrate the Water Center's 60th anniversary. This is the Water Resource Research Center's 60th anniversary. And we have an alumnus here that I had met before and has signed up, and we're reaching out to all people who might like to say something or send us a message, and we'll go over a little bit of the history and have some in-person remarks and some or live remarks and written remarks. It should be fun. And then on November 12th, we have a co-sponsored event hosted by the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy. It's a PFAS symposium. It's actually being held over on the north side of Speedway and by Zoom. There's, I believe, a kind of mingling event at 3 with the two panels starting at 4 p.m. and would encourage people to take a look at that. And then, of course, we do want everybody to save the date for our annual conference, which is May 2025, entitled Shared Borders, Shared Waters, Working Together in Times of Scarcity. And that'll be held here at the University of Arizona Student Union, and we also do offer free Zoom, one-way Zoom watch of it. We also have our photo contest going on. Dave, you might be a shoo-in to win. But we do an annual photo contest focusing on Arizona water, but then we have a category for water photos from anywhere else, and it's pretty broad what meets the eligibility of water. And the deadline is it up there?
December 20th.
Yeah, it's usually right before Christmas. And then we announce the winners at our, so we're mentioning this on Halloween, we do a chocolate fest right around the time of Valentine's Day. It'll be February 13th. And so we might want to put that up on there for the next slide, John, so people start marking down the save the date for that. And then we're partnering with the University of Arizona Poetry Center. Where do we have the postcards? Are they out there at the table? It's a really interesting exercise or program, a Dear Body of Water. And there's a woman who thought this up and looking for just comments, limericks, other things, just about writing to a body of water and what you might be feeling, thinking, and so forth. And so some of our photographs from our contest, the Poetry Center selected to make postcards. And so it's a nice combination of multimedia, sort of trying to not always be so hydrographically focused and think about it from a more expansive brain view. So we'd encourage anybody to pick up. It's also online if anybody wants to do that, the Zoom people. So we encourage people's participation in that. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure. I want to thank the Dave's publicity person, or whatever you call marketing person, reaching out. And we get a lot of emails. I get a lot of emails. Hey, we got this thing to offer you. And it's like, I had the opportunity to hear Dave. He was here in May of 2023 at the Center for Creative Photography. Beautiful talk, beautiful book. Bought a copy then, and it was like, wow, we'd love to host Dave. And so we worked it out, and we're so glad to have you here. Dave's a conservation photographer and author focused on the American West. He published 2 books, Sage Spirit, The American West at a Crossroads, and Prairie Thunder, The Nature of Colorado's Great Plains, prior to the book that we're talking about today, Living River, The Promise of the Mighty Colorado. Dave is a senior fellow in the International League of Conservation Photographers and a longtime contributor and partner of the Platte Basin Time Lapse. He works in partnership with numerous conservation groups, including Audubon Rockies, the Nature Conservancy, and Trout Unlimited Headwaters. With Living River and conservation storytelling, he seeks to take readers on a journey to see themselves as part of nature and the community of living things, and engendering empathy, caring, and love of the natural world, which we'll see just ooze out of his talk. Dave is based in Arvada, Colorado. I had to make sure I said that right. It's like Nevada. If anybody wants to know how Nevadans say their name, it's not Nevada, it's Nevada. And this is Arvada, Colorado, which I learned is between Boulder and Golden, in a beautiful place. So just to give everybody a sense of timing here, Dave's going to speak for about 25 or so minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions, and we'll close at about 4:05-ish or so, and then Dave will be here to sign books and mingle and so forth. So that's the basic run of the show. And with that, Dave, it's my great pleasure to turn the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you. I might go a little longer than 25 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you. My friends out in Zoom land. Yeah, it's great to be in Tucson talking about water. Just getting my stuff together here. So what I thought I'd do in the outset here is ground us in the river by reading a few words by Ann Castle, who wrote our foreword, and I'll talk more about Ann in a minute. We did mention that I've done two
I just want to make sure that it doesn't rain.
2 previous stories, one about the Colorado Prairie called Prairie Thunder, and then the Sage Spirit Project. That story is built around the life cycles of greater and Gunnison sage-grouse and their role as umbrella species for 350 other creatures that live in the American West, including us, and this is an endangered Gunnison sage-grouse. I am, in fact, a fancy dirtbag. This is kind of how I roll a lot of the time. And just prior to this, I was sleeping at Whitewater Draw, looking at sandhill cranes. The Colorado River is a waterway of superlatives, the most volatile supplies, the most iconic landscapes, the most dammed, the most litigated, and lamentably, the most threatened. It is also a river of contrasts, encompassing thriving cities juxtaposed with large swaths of rural areas where many households lack clean drinking water. Whitewater Rapids providing challenge and recreation upstream of a dried up estuary, and lush and lucrative farmland whose very viability is threatened by diminished supplies. This river is also unique in its ability to engender lifetime-long love and devotion, both from residents and from distant observers. Being in some way a part of the Colorado River Basin is a sort of source of pride. Whether it stems from a deep-seated sense of belonging to the landscape, a career in the science or management of the river, or the uncomplicated enjoyment of calling this part of the nation home. This is our home. This watershed is home to 40 million of us who are watershed neighbors in this giant community of a 1,450-mile long river. And we made these maps in this style. We do show the upper basin, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, and lower basin for the Colorado River Compact of California, Arizona, and Nevada. We show the river reaching the sea, which is really important. Water that goes outside of the watershed, trans-basin diversions to LA, Salt Lake City, Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Albuquerque, and so on. And then places that tie into the text and places that are important in the story. And this is another way of looking at a watershed. Imagine a human heart, or a mycelium crawling across the forest floor, or the human nervous system. All of that pulse and rhythm and life flowing from rivulets and creeks and riparian rivers to reach the big river. For we are made of rhythm and pulse and water and life. I started the project about 8 years ago now, a little over 8 years ago on the Yampa River. This is in Black Canyon, the Gunnison, 1,600 feet below the rim. In the beginning, there were a lot of stories about a dying river. We're still seeing so many dying river stories. And I heard experts who should have known better say the Colorado River is dying, really hopelessly. And I thought that was the trigger for me. I thought that's not right. That has not been my experience in roaming this landscape. So I started. This is fairly close to home for me, west side of Rocky Mountain National Park, where the Great River begins as just this little trickle from the Rocky Mountains. In this time of year, you can jump across the Colorado River. And where does it go? We send all our water, well, the amount that we're required to send from the upper basin states. Where does it go? It goes down to Lake Powell. It gets stored in Lake Powell, second largest reservoir in the United States. Goes through the Grand Canyon, gets stored again in Lake Mead, where we hold the water for the lower basin states and for Mexico, 1.5 million acre feet for Mexico. I visited in July of 22 and Lake Mead was at its lowest point. Things were looking pretty bleak. Thankfully, we had a good winter after that because in that particular summer, Lake Powell almost crashed. And I spent about 3 hours looking for this speedboat from the 1960s that was tipped up on end and had been underwater all of these years for 6 decades. In fact, everything in this frame was underwater. And that looked like climate change to me. So water goes to the agricultural fields, in this case, Yuma, where all of the winter lettuce in North America is grown. So if you eat a salad in North America, this time of year, you're eating the Colorado River. Also Imperial Valley, big industrial complexes in Mexicali in Mexico. That's where about 80% of the river goes. So in 2011, my wife Marla and I attempted to climb James Peak on the Continental Divide, 13,286 feet, 4 times in winter. And the winds were so intense, we got blown off every time. And then we made it on the last day of winter, March 20th of 2011. 2011 was an analog runoff and the cold, wet spring that lasted. I didn't know any of this at the time, but when we got up to that summit and the sun was going down, we went up for sunset and hiked down in the dark. I looked up towards Long's Peak on the horizon and I thought, holy cow, looking across all these ridges covered in snow, this is all the water we have for the coming year. So this picture took on a whole different meaning later on when I took on this project. Everything to the right or the east is going to flow to the Platte River and Denver and out to the Sandhill Cranes in Nebraska. And on the left side is going to go to the Fraser, first tributary of the Colorado, and onto the Colorado River. And it's a wonderful place to explore and to roam on snowshoes or skis and to go look for white-tailed ptarmigan who spend their whole life above timberline. And the way they survive winter is they bury themselves in snow on the coldest nights, up to a foot deep, which is a really big thrill when you're snowshoeing along and one explodes out of the snow right in front of you. And they also eat little tiny chia seed-sized willow buds. That's about 90% of their winter diet. And they're wonderful camouflage specialists. In the summertime, they look like rocks. Pika also use snowpack. They don't hibernate. What pika do is they gather an enormous pile or a larder of hay, of forbs and grasses that they will eat through the winter. And that hay pile is in the talus or the rocky slopes. And they're down there underneath the snowpack, being insulated by the snowpack, surviving winter that way in these really harsh conditions. And when you think about it, those two creatures, the ptarmigan and the pika, rely wholly on snowpack for their survival. And so do we. There's no separation. We told the story through river keepers who are doing great work in community, building community. Kirk Clanky is one of those people. Kirk told me early on that conservation begins with a conversation. He also told me that you can't stand 40 years in a river and not have a relationship to it. So Kirk's a really interesting character, and he's the president of the Headwaters Trout Unlimited chapter and volunteers in everything in the Headwaters, everything water related. Kirk's involved somehow. And so Kirk had this long running conversation with Denver Water. And in the beginning, it was acrimonious and nobody was listening to one another for decades. And Denver Water takes 60% of the Fraser River and flushes it through the Rocky Mountains. But recently things started to change and people started to listen to one another and the needs of the river herself. And so this is part of a Learning by Doing project. This is all a reworked channel in Willow Flats near Fraser, Colorado. You see established channel boundaries. It's a dredged out channel now, so the water is deeper and colder for trout. There's new willow that's been staked to shade the river and to make the river healthier, and it is succeeding spectacularly. Then we went back and we did a biomass study, and now we have all of these entities in the water together that didn't used to get along, Trout Unlimited and Denver Water and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and volunteers and kids. And we found that there's big fish in this part of the river. But what we also found was that there's fry. And so the fish are starting to reproduce again, even though it's a non-native fish. It was really exciting. It was really exciting to see lots of sculpin who live in the gaps in the river rock, and really good aquatic insect populations. And the birds love it. The yellow warblers are singing their heads off in restored willow that was restaked just a few years ago and setting up nesting territories. If you go upstream a little bit in the more turbulent water, or go up into Rocky Mountain Park, you'll find the American dipper. My buddy Mike Forsberg of Platte Basin Time Lapse calls them a trout with feathers because they dive for their prey and they eat the same stuff that trout do. And this guy had just plucked some aquatic insect larvae off the side of a rock in the river channel. Really neat birds that thrive on clean, turbulent water. In the headwaters, fire is a big threat. So here we see the Colorado coming out of Rocky Mountain National Park, going into Sun Valley Ranch Estates, which was completely wiped out by the East Troublesome Fire of 2020 in October. When it should have been snowing, it was 90 plus degrees, 90 plus mile an hour winds. An enormous firestorm came through and then it snowed. And thankfully it snowed before it became a conflagration with another fire, calmed the whole thing down. Eerily beautiful to see these stands of blackened trees against snow. And then the next spring, the forest floor starts to reclaim life, starts returning. These are monument plants growing. And now it's quite green in the forest floor, but there's still a whole lot of blackened and downed timber in that part of Rocky Mountain National Park. If you look down in this corner right here, think in terms of every crease in the headwaters mountains has a diversion structure on it. And they go to several different places. There is tunneling all underneath the Rocky Mountains. There's a place where the same water crosses the Continental Divide 3 times. But down here in this corner is Moffett Tunnel. And Moffett Tunnel has a train bore and a water bore built in 1908. And so diverted water goes down to the Moffett Tunnel and it gets sent through a 6-mile bore giant tunnel in the Rocky Mountains. This is on the east side now. So the Fraser River has joined South Boulder Creek and is going on to Denver and the metro area where we get 50 or 60% of our water. On the east side of the Rockies in the Platte River Basin, we get that water from Colorado River. And that's where the tension was between Denver water and Fraser. But everybody's talking now. Green River starts as a river of ice in the Wind River Range. So from glaciers, those first few trickles flow to Peak Lake and on out onto the plains and or through the Sage, actually Little Colorado Desert, through hay meadows and all that stuff. And then it reaches the first or northernmost dam in the Colorado River system, Fontenelle. So there's Fontenelle Dam. And when that was created, Seedskidee National Wildlife Refuge was created as a mitigation refuge for the habitat that was lost for Fontenelle, where Tom Kerner was the refuge manager while I was there. And Tom uses this photography. He's a wonderful photographer to showcase his own refuge. And he's wonderful also about habitat treatments. He'll try anything. And what he really pays attention to is habitat drivers, what makes this ecosystem go. And he's made Seedskidee super healthy. And one of those things is if you're beneath a dam, the river doesn't flood anymore. Willow and cottonwood need to have their toes or their roots in water. So they die out. And so you have to put back the woody vegetation if you want to have a healthy river. And here Russ is trimming willows to be staked along the green, and everything eats willow. The name Seedskidee comes from a Shoshone indigenous name, Siskidee-Aja, which means river of the sage grouse. Here we see a hen with a chick and some 80 plus broods, hens with broods, take their chicks to the river in summer to feed in wet meadows on insects and forbs. It's a stronghold for trumpeter swans. Because of the dam upstream, the river stays open in winter. Even when it's 40 below, it'll be flowing as a river of slush. But it stays open, and trumpeter swans come from as far as Alaska. 300 plus trumpeter swans overwinter in Seedskidee. This guy on the right has a collar, which is really, really lucky, fortuitous. I didn't know it at the time, but I asked Tom about it, and he's like, "How did you get that picture?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, we only collared 6 of them." And then he told me 2 of them were tracked flying to the Grand Canyon and back to central Wyoming, west central Wyoming. And nobody knows why, but it's pretty neat how the animals connected a big chunk of the watershed for us. They're our biggest waterfowl species. Cold, clean water, otters love that. The otter on the right is eating a Native American whitefish. There's a healthy otter population there. Kokanee salmon run upstream from Flaming Gorge. They are not native, but they really do no harm. What they do is they spawn, drop their eggs, and they die. And they contribute mightily to the biomass in Seedskidee Refuge. So one trip I showed up and a fisherman showed me a picture. He goes, "Check this out." You get a lot of that as a photographer. Like, you should have seen what I just saw. And it was the most amazing bobcat picture I've ever seen. It was on a phone. And he took it floating by this bluff. And the bobcat was framed by a cave that was all black background. It was unbelievable. And I scrapped my plans and I went looking for this bobcat. And I didn't know how I'd get in there. I had to cross the river, and I ended up going in like somewhere in here. And this was really sketchy here, but I got here, and then I figured out how to get up on the rim. And I spent a week doing that. And while I was doing that, there were prairie falcons screeching overhead, and I realized that they were bringing prey items to chicks that were on a scrape right over the Green River, where I had a tripod leg and 1 foot in the river to be able to make these pictures. So that was cool. And there were, marsh wrens and all the animals that are supposed to be there in the wetlands. And then one night I was tucked in a side canyon. I had seen a little brown flash the night before. And I thought maybe that's a bobcat. And I tucked in all camoed up, and right at sunset, she appeared, and it was truly magical. And then 3 kittens marched across the edge of the rim one by one. And when it got really dark, I was able to watch one of the kittens nursing on the very steep slope. And I thought there was a natal cave right there, maybe where they were born, but that was a magical experience. This is another magical experience. I went to the 2019 summer gathering by the Utah Denabakea group, which is the 5-tribe coalition for the protection of bears' ears. It's Navajo, Zuni, Hopi, Ute, and Ute Mountain Ute people. In this teepee are elders from those 5 tribes. And bears' ears was protected under Obama. It was eviscerated under the next administration and then reprotected by Biden. And presently, most of what the indigenous people wanted is protected. And there's a big movement afoot to engage indigenous people in co-management of public lands. And so that's happening. And we know this place for the wonderful dwellings and archaeological record, and you can find arrowheads and, mano matate from grinding corn. You can find all this stuff, turkey pens from raising turkeys. We don't call them ruins anymore. We call them dwellings because they are sacred to the folks that are from this place. You can go up on Muley Point and see the San Juan still carving the goosenecks of the San Juan in entrenched meanders, the biggest sediment load carrying river in the Colorado River watershed, or up on the mesa and see the Bears Ears buttes themselves, 2 sandstone buttes about 8,600 feet in elevation in the sage and ponderosa forest, just wonderful and magical up there. And I met Cynthia Wilson. I wanted to tell an indigenous water story, and I met Cynthia, who at the time was the traditional foods coordinator for Utah Denabakea. So she was helping other families raise corn, beans, and squash of the ancestors, plus Bears Ears potatoes. So these little potatoes were discovered when the Native American people were mapping the vegetation plots of the ancestors, which was how the original boundaries for Bears Ears were drawn. And they discovered these potatoes, which are very nutritious and climate resilient. And now they're being grown in traditional foods gardens. These folks have no tap for water. They have no access to clean water. And Henry Wilson Sr., Cynthia's dad, I went to the Goulding's water station with him. So he's filling a 325-gallon tank in a 3/4-ton pickup truck, dedicated truck for water with a garden hose, takes about a half hour. This is a 2.5-hour line just to collect water for the day. And then you have to take it home and distribute the water. And in the traditional foods garden is one place. This system wasn't working. It was not distributing the water evenly. So the people are doing that. And Cynthia's mom, Eloise, is in the foreground with Cynthia, Jayana, and Brandon in the background, watering every plant in the garden. And I went back a month later, and now the corn's knee high, and it was a really celebratory moment. And they get enormous productivity, even though they're growing these crops in red sand. Pretty cool. Ann Castle, appointed by Joe Biden a couple of years ago as the Upper Colorado River Basin Commissioner. So she's involved in the talks right now of the renegotiation of the terms of the Colorado River Compact. But during the pandemic, she and Bitta Becker, another water lawyer colleague, decided together that this extreme need for water was really exacerbated by the pandemic. Multi-generational homes, we're being told to wash our hands for 20 seconds. They don't even have access to water. So indigenous people were hit extremely hard. And so they formed tribalcleanwater.org, or the universal rights to clean water for tribal communities. And there is funding from the Infrastructure Act, $3.5 billion for tribes to have access to water. The rights for the indigenous folks in this region need to be adjudicated, and there's processes to go through, but at least the wheels are in motion, and we can hope that they get access to water. This was my very first look at the Gila River, Upper Gila. Drove 900 miles, hiked up this hill, realized I'd forgotten my tripod and saw this. Thought I better figure out how to make this picture. But it's really cool. It flows out of the Mogollon Range beneath this beautiful canopy of cottonwoods, hits the gauge here, the water gauge. And this is Martha Cooper. The reason I posed Martha here is because since the 60s, there was a proposed dam for the Upper Gila that would have sent 14,000 acre feet to Arizona, called extra water for when they have monsoon events. All of us in this room know there is no extra water. So Martha came on the scene about 17 years ago. Nature Conservancy has a farm that was donated to them. And with that farm, they have a water right. And Martha's in those rooms with the irrigators for 16 years. And they start to listen to each other. And it kind of sounds like that Kurt Clanky story with Denver Water. And then they start to agree on some stuff. And in 2021, it was decided the irrigators would accept the environmentally preferred alternative for irrigation in the valley and stop the dam. And Michelle Lujan, the governor of New Mexico, signed the papers to stop the dam, and Gila is wild and free, and this is what it looks like. This is what a wild southwestern river looks like. It's just spectacular, everything there. Here we see the Gila coming out of the Mogollon Mountains so that's a perennial river and has cottonwoods lining the whole thing. And then down here, this is Mogollon Creek, which is a flashy creek. It only gets water through flash floods. So those are sycamore trees there. Up in the Gila Cliffs are the ancient dwellings from when the Mogollon people lived up there at the same time that the ancestral Puebloans were in southeast Utah. It's an incredibly birdy place, wildlife rich, one of the most biodiverse places in the American Southwest, and even holds the little tiny southwest willow flycatcher, endangered and about this big. And they like to be way up high, and they circle around, and their call is Fitzbew, Fitzbew. And it's cute, but you'd like them to go down every once in a while. Very endangered bird. And really, just to back up, well, that didn't work. It's habitat loss. So these guys, all of that woody vegetation, the willow and the cottonwood matters to these birds. They all have a specific structural need. The beavers don't build dams because it's a flash flood thrown river, so they dig holes in the banks, and there's a good beaver population there. Sandhill cranes overwinter. Gila always gives a gift. I was leaving. I was saying goodbye to the river. I got to go home. And I hadn't seen these birds all week. I heard them, but the pasture grass was too high. I never saw them. And then I get emotional. I'm having this tearful goodbye to the Gila, and these two birds lift off and fly across that beautiful golden and orange canopy. I was just here, Whitewater Draw. So 20,000 cranes or so go there in winter. Really interesting sandhill crane story, because they don't really fit in with, we tried, I was just talking to Michael Forsberg about this. We try to assign them to specific migrations, and these guys are just kind of their outlier little population. And anyway, it's a wonderful place and lots of life there. There was great murmurations of yellow-headed blackbirds and getting stirred up by harriers, and lots of life beyond the cranes. Where there's water, there's life. And if you go a valley over to the San Pedro, there's Holly Richter, who's a hydrologist. She was working for Nature Conservancy at the time. Now she's freelance with her own group called Raise the River Alliance. Holly is, she started on the Yampa, earned her PhD at Colorado State. Holly's out there. Hi, Holly. I know you're watching, so everybody say hi, Holly. Hi. Anyway, I'm going to go see Holly in a couple of days. This is on the San Pedro. San Pedro is really stressed by overpumping of groundwater. There's a cone of depression in the aquifer underneath the river. It's about 60% dry and 40% wet. But Benson and Sierra Vista and Fort Huachuca and all these entities depend on this little river. Plus, It's a hemispherically important river to migrating songbirds. So we got to figure it out. And there's infiltration sites, 7 or 9 of them. And I think Governor Hobbs was just down there a couple of days ago, announcing another site to infiltrate gray water into the aquifer to raise the water table. So Holly asked me a little over a year ago, can you time lapse the monsoon? And I said, I don't know, Holly, but I know people. And my friend at Platte Basin Time Lapse, Jeff, built a box for me that has a rain sensor on it. So that speeds up when it senses rain. And this is just a quick little clip of what we're seeing. It's about 12 feet up in a cottonwood tree about 2 miles north of the border. And I'm going to go down there and I expect I'm going to have a lot more. So it rained and water filled and then it drained into the aquifer. And then it rained at night, more water, and then it just kind of disappears. So this is a crude video, but it's a real quick, just little look. I think, so this year there was 10 inches of rain down there. I was there for one event where it rained 2 inches in a half hour, right, in August. Really intense. So if everything's working with my electronics, I think we're going to be able to show the relationship of ground and surface water in a single frame, in a short video. So that's what we're after. And I think that'll be something new. And these were the original groundwater pumps. A lot of these mom and pops are drying up because of the big cheese farms and the big straws that are in the aquifer. The border wall, when I first went there, where across at the river was just these little X-shaped bollards that are about waist high. And now it's this massive wall with a bridge that wasn't there before. And lights. My God, songbirds migrate at night. What are we doing? And you can see the Huachucas way out here in the distance. So the wall stops at the base of the Huachuca Mountains. And just recently, 2 jaguars have made it across right there. So there is a healthy population of jaguars just over the border, and some of them would like to disperse and come here if we would make it more inviting. Yeah, wonderfully birdie place. Gila woodpeckers and chats, yellow-breasted chats singing their heads off. It's wonderful to go up on top of Coronado Peak and Coronado National Memorial and see down here is the San Pedro and the border wall in Mexico, and just kind of take in the whole thing and the idea that the borderlands are so incredibly beautiful and just so important ecologically. You can go up Ramsey Creek and see the deciduous trees where Ramsey, in the Huachucas where the Ramsey is coming out of the mountains there. Little tiny river system. And you guys know this, the Sky Islands, there's 50 some Sky Island ranges in southern Arizona, each with 5 or 6 distinct biomes as you go up in elevation with unique plant and animal species like the Coues deer, about waist high, elfin white-tailed deer cousin with amazing eyebrows, or eyelashes rather. I did this flight with Whitehawk in 2018, pretty much for this picture, because at the time the Escalade development was planned for here, and there would have been a tramway down to the confluence. This is the Colorado in shade, and this is the Little Colorado, which is blue from calcium carbonate from the spring upstream. So at the time, it would have been horrific. You know, the confluence is sacred to all of the tribes of the Grand Canyon region. It's the birthplace of the Hopi people, and it's the current homeland of the Navajo people. And thankfully, the Navajo folks had the wisdom to stop that development. I've done 5 raft trips with Audubon Rockies. This is my pal, Allison Holloran, who's the executive director of Audubon Rockies. And we've worked together on all these projects that I've done. And she's just wonderfully supportive and a dear friend. This is near her home in Fort Collins, Colorado. Her partner in crime is Abby Burke, always with a permagrin when she's in a boat. And Abby is the Western Waters Director for Audubon Rockies and really engaged in water conservation throughout the watershed. A wonderful person. This was my very first raft trip with these guys on the Yampa. So great fun. There's nothing like floating underneath these walls of time, just floating at the pace of the river, recalibrating your life to the pace of the river. to visit the sacred confluence and soak in that wonderful turquoise water, to peer down into Deer Creek Slot Canyon, sacred to the Zuni people. Condors are doing better. There's more condors in the wild than in captivity now. Their number one cause of mortality is still lead ammunition, although non-lead ammunition is readily available and often free. So we're making progress there. They're all in this region raised at the Peregrine Fund in Boise, and then raised there and then released at Vermilion Cliffs near the North Rim. This guy was photographed at Zion, actually. I'm standing here because of Marla, and this is a little tough. At the start of the pandemic, she was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer, liposarcoma, and terrible diagnosis, but she never gave up hope for a second. And Marla fought hard through chemo, and there was a point where in 2021, we were able to, she had clean scans and she regained all of her strength, and she was an incredible athlete. And we were able to resume our tradition on every New Year's Day. We would get up in the dark and hike up in the dark on snowshoes in the headwaters and welcome sunrise of a new year as the sun crested the Rocky Mountains. And this was 2021. But then the cancer came back and there was more complications and surgeries. And Marla passed in May of 22. And she was love and light and radiance and joy and generosity and touched everybody who knew her. And thank you for indulging me this. I think of Marla today as levitating over the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon and having the most joy I've ever seen her have. And I had a chapter that wasn't done. I was putting the book together when she passed. And I hadn't been to the Delta yet because of the pandemic and everything else. Said the river, imagine everything you can imagine, then keep going. Thank you, Mary Oliver. So I had to figure out how to do a Delta chapter. I couldn't write it because I hadn't been there. I reached out to Jennifer Pitt, 30 plus years with Audubon in the Delta, conservation leader, community organizer, incredible person. And she sat for a wonderful interview, and that became our chapter. And so thank you to Jennifer for giving grit and texture and connections and story that I never could have written. And then I went there and I flew over border with Lighthawk. This is Yuma Lettuce, border wall. Colorado River comes in, hits Morelos Dam, gets shunted to Mexicali for agriculture. This is what's left of the Colorado River. And that's Algodones in the lower right. So that's why we hear people say, well, the river dries up in Mexico. But that's not entirely true. Cienega de Santa Clara was created by a leaky pipe on the US side. And now it's incredibly important ecologically. Giant Cienega south of the border in the Gulf of California. There's restoration sites, and the Raise the River Alliance, an international alliance of conservation groups working together to return the river to the sea. And these folks are really serious about that. So here, Mary Lou has a cottonwood tree on the right, and Dylan has willow, and they're growing all the plants in this greenhouse that are going into the restoration site. So that's pretty neat. And this is what they look like before they restore them. This is the floodplain of the Colorado River at the Inicio site, which is being restored right now. And so because of, I think it's Minute 23, an international agreement, the United States is helping Mexico with efficiencies in Mexicali, and a little bit of that water gets sent over for restoration of the saved water. And so with less than 1% of the historic flow, these parts of the Delta are getting restored, like Chaussee, which is now a mature site, wonderful cottonwoods. And Miguel Alleman, now over 10 years old. So when it was surveyed in 2013, there were 23 bird species before they started the restoration. 10 years later, mature cottonwoods, smells loamy, humid when you walk in there, birds are singing. It went from 23 bird species to 123. Do you think the yellow warbler can hopscotch on migration across those restoration sites when 18 million songbirds cross the Colorado River Delta? And I know this isn't the Colorado River, but I think of it as the hopeful impression of the Colorado River reaching the sea. These are tidal flats in the Gulf of California. It's achingly beautiful to fly over this country. We can't give up. And it's up to us to change our relationship to water in the American West. That's our job. We probably have enough water if we can get our act together. But it's going to take a lot more folks engaged. And Ann Castle tells me all the time, Dave, we just need more people to care. So is there hope for the Colorado River? You're darn right there's hope for the Colorado River. We see the hope in these river keepers who are organizing, building community for their home river, for their part of the watershed. And I think we can draw from those folks. I'm not a person to tell people what to do. I get that question all the time. What can I do, Dave? Take shorter showers? Well, for the most part, that water's getting recycled. But so I don't tell people what to do. But what I do suggest is that, first of all, we have a great resource page in the back of the book. If people want to engage, we can find our own way. But I think it's a lot more effective if we know and love the river. And so I just simply say, go to the river. Go to the river and be present with her. The reason I attach the female pronoun is because I was taught that by my indigenous friends. Be present with her. And if we go back and we return and we let it soak into us, we start to, in our own way, become the river. All of you guys are here for some reason that probably has to do with being touched by a river at some point in your lives. And if enough of us do that culturally, we start to become the river. And then things start to begin to change. So go to the river. Become the river. Speak for her. We are the river. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That's great. Could look at these pictures for a long, long time. Unfortunately, we are time limited, but we do have some time for questions. So from those in the room, anybody like to start with a question? Hi. And if you speak up, because we want to make sure the Zoom people hear it too.
You didn't mention the word alfalfa.
Right.
Is that on purpose? I mean, not only, I mean, there are still some Saudi farms in Arizona, not on Arizona state land anymore, as well as I understand, but there are Saudi farms sending alfalfa, but there are also other growers along the Colorado. I mean, an awful lot of Colorado River water is going to Saudi Arabia in the form of alfalfa, which it's a free market, and what can we do? But I just consider that unfortunate. You didn't have anything from Echo Park. Have you been to Echo Park? Yeah, I mean, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have pictures of Echo Park. Just the alfalfa question. So I'm very familiar with the notion that 80% of the river or more goes to agriculture, and that the big users are in the lower basin. So in the upper basin, there's thousands of users that are mom and pops, and in the lower basin, there's 20 or something. You know, a lot fewer entities. Don't quote me on any of this stuff, just making a comparison. And so we grow a lot of alfalfa for cows. We grow food to raise food in this watershed, right? I find that unsavory, but I'm also mindful that these are big monolithic industries, and I had to choose a lane for my story. And my story is about a hopeful story about the Colorado River. I don't shy away from ag, but I also don't demonize anybody, you know, because there's giant economies attached to all this stuff too. And now we're at a point where everybody's going to be taking cuts, and we don't know how that's going to shake out. But some of this stuff is going to markets are going to sort out some of this stuff. So I couldn't take a hard position on alfalfa or lower basin agriculture and be fair and truthful to the story that I wanted to tell.
Yes.
Thank you for this, absolutely beautiful and inspiring. One of the things I've recently heard is that as the water levels in Lake Powell have been dropping, there has been an increased resurgence of vegetation and sort of spontaneous regeneration in some of the side canyons like Escalante. Have you been able to bear witness to some of that regeneration and rebirth?
No, I haven't done Lake Powell exploration really, but there's a guy, Elliot Ross, a colleague, Elliot Ross, who he has a wonderful indigenous piece in Time magazine right now about indigenous water. But Elliot, in fact, just moved to Boulder, Utah, so he could be in this ecosystem. But Elliot is doing incredible work in Lake Powell, and the very thing that you just talked about. Yeah. Thank you.
Questions? I had a question. Just you mentioned 8 years ago you started, but how long did it take you to put the book together?
So I shot for parts of 6 years. Some of those years I was in the field half the time. And then when we partnered with Walton Family Foundation, they wanted us to produce a book pretty quickly. And I was asked to write the book as well. And so I wrote all of the first drafts in 3 months. And then we spent about a year putting the book together. So everything was on a pretty accelerated timeline. But I have a great team. I'll just say briefly that Braided River produces only conservation photography books. They do about 2 a year. And they make these books as foundations of long-term campaigns with conservation partners. And so, like my sage book, they still stand behind my sage book because that topic is still viable. In this book, I'll be probably doing this for years to come because this topic isn't going away. And I'm so grateful to be able to be a part of the Braided River team. It's not just me by any means. In conservation photography, none of us do any of this alone. We need so many people, and it's a metaphor for, saving parts of the river too. It takes all of us, rowing together. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was just beautiful, and the story that you told with it. I was curious, there are so many Colorado River books, so many, and including, the photography and the stories. And I was curious, first of all, if you drew from any of those for this book. And then second of all, what you hope your contribution, this book will be to the body of work on the Colorado River.
Thanks. That's a brilliant question. Thank you so much. And thanks for the kind words. So I have a lot of those books. And there's quite a few people that I admire greatly that are working in this space. And so I referenced Pete McBride's work, some. A guy named Jim Richardson from Nat Geo. Jim's in his 70s now, dear friend. We teach workshops together. Jim did a book in 1995, and he sent me that book when I started this project. And we were able to hold our books together, 2 books 30 years apart about the Colorado River. But Jim's book was revelatory for me. So it wasn't just contemporary things. I looked back on lots of materials, and ultimately I decided that my contribution, everything I've done to date has been about caring about a place, caring about an ecosystem, caring about the sagebrush sea, starting with habitat first, and trying to draw connections from there. And I just felt like my contribution was to tell a story of hope in a time of hopelessness. And what I want most for this work to do is bring us together in a really meaningful way, where we start to, like the examples with a couple of the river keepers, where we start to listen to one another And we say, yeah, this is possible. You know, we reimagine the possible for the Colorado River. And maybe some of it's woo-foo-foo, but I think we can do great things. But a lot more people need to be engaged. Thank you.
We have, yeah, I'm looking here because I'd really like to see if everybody who's here will take one of the postcards and write something. I mean, really, anything you write, but there's a photo from the white draw, is that what it is? You know, down in the Wilcox area.
Whitewater.
Whitewater. And that's one of the photos that was printed up, and I was just looking at that because, and we were just down in that area. I think the migrations just, did you say you just went this weekend?
Yeah, there's about 1,000 birds.
Yeah, because it was a little early, I think, when we were there.
There's more birds than water
So-
right now.
Are they still there?
So I think they were just coming.
Just arriving.
Yeah, they're just arriving now.
They're just
Yeah,
arriving.
so can you keep them out so they're not hidden? It's a little hidden in the back there. And I also want to say, because I don't know how multiple lists were used for getting the word out, and I didn't explicitly invite everybody to just subscribe to the WRC's Weekly Wave. That's how you can keep informed of the various events, including this one and some of the others coming up, and little news stories and so forth. So if you're not subscribed, go to our website, WRRC.arizona.edu, and we'd love to have you subscribe. Comes on Fridays. And Jesse, do we have any questions from the Zoom attendees?
I haven't seen any questions, but there are several lovely compliments on your beautiful photography and the wonderful presentation.
Thanks, beautiful people. This gentleman had a question.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Dave, I didn't see.
No, I was gonna ask.
Hi, Dave. I'm Dave.
Nice to meet you, Dave. We all come into the Colorado Basin with preconceived notions of what to expect.
Yeah,
Sharon's identified that you've spent 8 years plus gathering pictures and that. What most surprised you on your journey the last 8 years?
I love that question. What most surprised me is we make things so big and so hard. Yet, if we just give the river a little nudge, she knows exactly what to do. And I think that's something to be mindful of when we think all hope is lost. And you think about Mexico, and here you have people growing plants in a greenhouse, and you saw how forlorn that place was that hadn't been restored yet, and creating places that are not just beautiful, but super viable ecologically, super valuable, and also places where local people can take great pride in what they've created and what they're protecting. And that's where it's at. That's how we expand all of this and scale it up and create a better watershed healthier watershed for all of us.
Well said, thank you.
Thank you.
And just as a comment, I think what's through your messaging is very optimistic messaging, right? You know, not losing hope and all that. But also you really underscored, emphasized the development of partnerships and people sharing. And so there's a lot of opportunity, right, if we work together.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everywhere I go, I just say, I'm Dave, I'm a conservation photographer, I'm working on this thing. And people say, come on out, I want to talk to you. You know, people doing work in the field want their story told. And they want their work to matter. They want it to be important. And I think all of us have that in us. If we want to do good in this watershed, all we have to do, you know, example with the indigenous folks, come with a good heart. They know if you came with a good heart. We can all see that if people are authentic. And let's just try to do some good.
I think that's a good way to end. Let's all try to do some good. Let's thank Dave for spending his time. We have some cookies and candies over there. Dave's prepared to sign some books out there. So